Now that we filled out the unit circle, we want to look at the trig functions. And there are 6 trig functions. The first 3 you learned in geometry: sine, cosine, and tangent. But now we're going to look at 3 additional ones: cosecant, secant, and cotangent, which are just going to be reciprocals of the functions you learned in geometry. So let's start with the geometric definition. Sine, you learned from the SOHCAHTOA, is opposite over hypotenuse. When we look at the algebraic definition or the unit circle definition, sine values are the y values. And the reason for that is the hypotenuse always ends up being 1. So really we end up with y over 1, which is just y. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. The adjacent in my triangles are always the x values. So it's going to be x over 1 on the unit circle, which is just plain old x. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. And if we said up here sine is opposite over hypotenuse, and on the unit circle it's y over 1, that means the opposite is y, and the adjacent is going to be x. The other way you can look at tangent is that it's going to be the sine divided by the cosine. Since we know sine or y is cosines or x, another way you can write tangent is going to be sine divided by cosine. As I said at the beginning, these other 3 are then reciprocal functions, and reciprocal means you just flip the fraction. So the cosecant is going to be the hypotenuse over the opposite. Cosecant is related to sine, hypotenuse over opposite, which means algebraically it's going to be 1 over y. And if you want to look at that from a sine and cosine perspective, it's going to be 1 over sine. Since we said that sine is the same thing as y, cosecant is going to be the same thing as 1 over sine. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So we're going to flip our geometric definition to hypotenuse over adjacent, which is 1 over x. And if I write in terms of sine and cosines, secant is the same thing as 1 over cosine. The last one then, cotangent, is going to be the adjacent over the opposite. So once again, we're going to flip our tangent, which is going to give me x divided by y, which is the same thing as the cosine of theta over the sine of theta, just reversing my sine and cosine that I had over there. Now, these original functions can also be seen as reciprocals of cosecant. Let's say I gave you hypotenuse over opposite. You know that the sine then is the reciprocal, opposite over hypotenuse. But you can also apply these same algebraic definitions. Sine is going to be the same thing as 1 over the cosecant of theta. Cosine then and secant are reciprocals, so we could also write cosine as 1 over the secant of theta. And then finally, cotangent and tangent are reciprocals of each other, so tangent could also be written as 1 over the cotangent of theta, or sine over cosine. Many different ways that we can write that. So now what we want to do is we want to find those 6 trig functions from values on the unit circle. So here I'm giving you that t is equal to 2 pi. And I look back at my unit circle to see what is the ordered pair at 2 pi. And the point on the unit circle for 2 pi is going to be 1, 0, where 1 is the x value and 0 is the y value. So now I can begin filling in my 6 trig functions based off of that definition. We know the sine of t is the exact same thing as the y value, based off of our definition we have up here, sine equaling y. So that means the sine of t is going to be 0. The cosine of t is the same thing as the x value, which will be 1. And then finally, the tangent of t, we know is going to be y over x, which is 0 over 1, which yields a 0. We can use the exact same thought process then for the reciprocal functions. Cosecant, which you write as CSC, is going to equal 1 over y, which is 1 over 0, and we know 1 over 0 is undefined. So cosecant will be undefined. I can also see that by looking at sine being 0, and if I put anything over 0, I'm going to be undefined. The secant of t, which is written as SEC, is the same thing as 1 over x, and we know x is 1, so my secant would be 1. And then finally, the cotangent of t, cotangent is x divided by y, which is 1 over 0, which once again is undefined.